it's possible to talk about death. And talking about death can actually create some sort of connection that can enrich us. So basically, in the presence of death, there can be abundance of life, and we can meet each other as fellow mortals. We'll be discussing death, which is universal. All of us will die at some point. But at the same time, my death and your thoughts about your death, they're so intimate and personal, but still we can open up, we can find each other. And if we find each other, death could be something that connects us.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Christiaan Rhodius as we take a communication perspective on palliative care. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Christiaan Rhodius. Christiaan is a Dutch doctor specialized in palliative medicine. Together with his wife and 4 children, he currently lives and works in Oslo, Norway. You'll get to hear more from him about himself later. This is our very first episode for season 4, and I'm really happy to be starting this new season with this conversation. A couple different things for this year that I want to make you aware of include that I'm not posting episodes in any kind of series. That felt really meaningful this past year, and I'm grateful for that. This coming year, a lot of the conversation partners I have lined up come from 2 main perspectives: systems thinking and social constructionism. So I imagine you're going to feel that influence throughout, because this whole year is kind of a exploration, deep dive into the intersection of CMM with those 2 perspectives. You know, we're always saying that there's multiple stories and there's multiple perspectives. So this is a great moment to remind ourselves that CMM, while such a valuable lens, is not the only lens, and it doesn't have to be a either or situation either. You can use CMM in partnership with other lenses like constructionism and systems thinking. We are also bumping down to posting an episode every other week instead of every week. This is because I have started a new role as executive director at the CMM Institute. So it's important for me to create a little more space in my life to invest energy in other CMM related projects. We also have so many great resources that already exist, and we want to encourage you to check those out by giving you a pause every other week as well. Episodes are also going to be released on Wednesdays, as you've already realized. Since this is coming out on a Wednesday, episodes will be released Wednesdays instead of Mondays, because we actually have another CMM Institute podcast that's being released on Mondays throughout this year. It's the Cosmo Parenting Podcast, the next turn in the Cosmo Activities series of resources. It's available for free. You can subscribe on the Cosmo Parenting Substack. I'll include a link to that in the show notes for you to access easily. It's short episodes once a week over the course of 2025. I'm facilitating it as the resident CMM Institute podcaster, and I'm joined by people who are parenting. I'm joined by Stephanie Higgs, who you'll remember from an earlier episode of this podcast. She's a gifted educator. She's sharing some great strategies to integrate into parenting. I'm joined by Don Weissenen and Nana Bonsu, who you will also recognize as previous guests of this podcast. They're bringing the communication scholar perspective, the family therapist perspective, their expertise in their lines of work, but also as people who are parenting themselves. So on Mondays, you can absolutely go check that out. And then these episodes will be released every other Wednesday. The last thing I want to reemphasize as we turn towards this new season is that our vision for this podcast, in the context of everything else we're doing at the CMM Institute, is for this to be the space where we really get to model embodying a communication perspective and really emphasizing process over outcome. You know, unlike some other podcasts, this is not about us solving an issue or getting a whole story in one short hour. It's about the ways of being together in conversation, ways that create the space for storytelling, and importantly, story hearing. I think this can be uncomfortable for people at times because it means episodes don't come hand delivered with a tidy little bow on top. Sometimes we explore a number of topics, and most times, we don't have answers for the questions that we are exploring together. But again, for us, the emphasis is on the exploring rather than the answers and the quality of that exploring and how we move through that in a meaningful way. So I just want to offer you that language and that lens of understanding and seeing what the purpose of this podcast is. And I'm so excited to have you join me for this conversation as we begin season 4. So let's begin the conversation with Christiaan. Hello, Christiaan.
Hello. Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to discussing together the topic of death and dying and how it contributes to our life and how perhaps another story or a broader story can enrich our lives. So happy to be here.
Good. Yes. Welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you as well. I'm wanting to start us off by resurrecting something that I used to do on the podcast, and I haven't in a while. And that is to ask the question, how are you arriving? To me, this is about understanding context and appreciating that we are people outside of the conversation we're having. And so what are we bringing with us? So one thing that I'll share to start us off is that I'm feeling excitement and some nerves because this is our first recording of 2025. And so it feels like kind of flexing a muscle. I've been on a little bit of a break and now jumping back into things. I'm excited to approach things a little differently this year. What about you? How are you arriving?
How am I arriving? Excited as well, because the topic is something I'm very eager to talk about because already, maybe from the start, it's my equally simple and far-reaching conviction that if we ignore death, we miss out on life. And I'll introduce myself later, but I've been working in palliative care for quite some while. But I really feel that if we could have a different view or a different perspective on death, it will change our lives as well. And I'm looking forward to discussing that with you. So most of all, excitement of being here and having the chance to explore the topic together.
I think that's meaningful context to kind of know what this topic means to you. So yes, let's go back to the beginning and answer the question of how did we get here? Please introduce yourself and share with us what you want us to know as we go into this conversation.
Okay. Well, thanks for having the opportunity. I thought doing two things. I'll give you some dry, basic facts about me and introduce myself by telling a story that brings us back to medical school, which sort of planted a seed for this thought of death being something that can enrich our lives. So basically, first, dry facts. My name is Christiaan Rhodius. I'm a Dutchman, married to Hanneke. We have 4 children, and we currently live in Norway. I'm trained as a medical doctor, specialized as an elderly care physician, and further specialized in palliative medicine. I've been doing that about 20 years now and working also as an educator. So I teach medical students, teach doctors in training. I'm examinator or a censor. I'm not sure. This is the difficulty. I'm living in Norway now, learning Norwegian. So my English is a bit rusty and dusty. So if I'm looking for words, you'll recognize right away. But I'm an examinator at the Dutch course for doctors specializing in palliative care. And before moving to Oslo, I worked in a hospice bardo, worked in the hospital, where we not only could admit people in the last phase of life, but we also had an outpatient department. And we're very eager to raise awareness in society on death, dying, life, grief, those sort of topics. That was what I was doing before we moved to Oslo. Currently, I'm trying to find a job, which is not that easy because the Norwegian health authorities don't acknowledge my training and expertise, basically limiting my possibility to have a permanent position. Yeah. But I've recently found 2 temporary small positions in nursing homes in Oslo. So also today I've been working clinically, which is a great pleasure of doing that. So that's basically dry facts from my part. And the story as introduction while preparing for this podcast is one from medical school because I enjoyed student life. So I was enjoying student life and also enjoying medical school. But medical school is also a bit theoretically boring, if I may say so. I was basically missing out on contact with people and patients.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to volunteer in a hospice and helping out with daily care for people that were admitted there. And at some point, one of the nurses said, "Here's your cup of coffee. You go into that room and you sit next to that patient and see if they want to talk and see where the conversation takes you." And I learned so much by doing that, just by sitting with people and hearing their story. And I remember very well a relatively young woman. She was about 50 or 60. And we had very open conversations about her knowing that she was going to die. And she told me how actually her knowing that she was going to die actually enriched her life on actually feeling more alive, even though she was closer to death than she used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And she was reading Tuesdays with Morris at the time. I don't know if you know that book.
Yes.
So it's a brilliant book, and she encouraged me to read the book and think about my life. And we had that one conversation, and I remember cycling away after this meeting and thinking, okay, so what's life about? And I'm here studying medicine and being stressed about exams and all sort of things, but perhaps there's a different approach. And I mentioned it to her that first conversation set in motion a sort of train of thought of what am I doing here, and if there's death, why am I stressing so hard for medicine? Should I be bothered about medicine at all? And she encouraged me to use, not only use, but develop all my talents and put them to work for the contribution of the greater good or society, and not to let go and be discouraged about the fact that at some point we die.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a beautiful series of conversations that we had, which really helped me think differently. And basically, if I reflect on those conversations, what it taught me was, first of all, it's possible to talk about death. And talking about death can actually create some sort of connection that can enrich us. So basically, in the presence of death, there can be abundance of life. And we can meet each other as fellow mortals. And if we meet each other as fellow mortals, we're sort of a level playing ground.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if we'll be discussing things, we'll be discussing death, which is universal. All of us will die at some point. But at the same time, my death and your thoughts about your death, they're so intimate and personal, but still we can open up and find each other, or at least share. And in that sharing, where there's no right or wrong, you can say things about your death. I can say things about my death or how I look about it. We can find each other. And if we find each other, it helps us to see beyond all the differences that could be part in life, or that could play a role how we think about politics, or if we're rich or poor, or you name it, gender. Death could be something that connects us. Um, so that was basically the what those stories helped me, or those conversations helped me to think about. And I think also planted the seed of this conviction that if we ignore death, we miss out on life. That is a sort of beginning story that could direct our conversation. Yeah, there's much to be said about it, but at the end, we'll have some sort of common ground about it. Yeah.
It's a great place to start. And I'm wondering if, now that you've introduced yourself, could you introduce us to palliative care? What does that encompass?
That's a great question. Do you know where the word palliative comes from?
I don't.
So basically, if we have some understanding about where the word comes from, that will give us direction. Because the word palliative comes from the Latin pallium, and that means coat or cloak.
Okay.
And basically, what palliative care does is give us support or comfort in the moment when we're hit by rain or wind or cold or summer breeze, whatever the conditions. If we need protection, if we need support, palliative care is there for you. And palliative care and the support we provide, we give knowing that death is at some point near. It doesn't have to mean that death is already very close by. It means that we have a diagnosis or a disease that will at some point end in death. But it could be years, it could be months. But if there's a need for care, palliative care provides that care. And the English have a beautiful saying that says, shelter from the rain from the moment it rains. So if there's a need for you for extra care in the sight of being confronted with an incurable disease, palliative care is there for you. So basically, that's palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be touching on that later on as well, I think. Life is much more than our physical bodies. So palliative care has focus on all sorts of needs. So independent on current physical symptoms, there could be need or gain from having palliative care. And maybe as a start already, so there's many ways in which I think ignoring death misses out on life. But one of the things is that if we're afraid of the word palliative care, and we only think of palliative care as something that is only in the last phase of life, saying last days or maybe weeks, we miss out on potential treatment that can help us much earlier on in the disease trajectory.
To me, it's such an important conversation to have using a communication perspective. I think talking about death and dying using a communication perspective is such a great example of what a communication perspective can offer, because so much of death and dying is about how we communicate about death and dying, how we make meaning out of it. So I'm curious to know more about, for you, what do you mean? What does it mean to you that if we ignore death, we miss out on life?
Well, maybe commenting first on the whole communication perspective. So communication always has to do with two partners in the conversation. Otherwise, there's no communication. So for me, I need a tool, or at least I need a perspective or a mindset in order to know how I can help others who are in this palliative phase or having a disease that is incurable. So for me, the question that is very helpful would be what is called the patient dignity question. And the patient dignity question goes like this: what do I need to know about you as a person in order for me to give you the best possible care? So here I am trying to make sense of your thinking about death. And as said, your death is yours in the sense that I don't know what is going on in your mind and what's important for you. So if we ignore death and all the things that death sets in motion, relationally or emotionally, and there's no way for me to help you support your quality of life. So we need to open up this conversation. And the patient dignity question, which is rather validated in lots of areas, is very helpful for me to get to know you, and also to point out that I'm willing to support you. I'm willing to provide you this cloak, this pallium, to help you live as good as possible. So that's, I think, one way of saying I care about you, I see you, and because I see you, I want to know you more. So I want to cultivate a sense of wonder and curiosity to really get to know you and see what's going on inside you, and how can I adjust my care, my actions to your benefit. So for me, that's palliative care. And since death is such a large and overwhelming topic, it could translate itself in all sorts of quote unquote problems that you could need solving with or need help with, because I don't need to solve it, but I can be present and help you go through the phase of life where you are.
Yeah.
And maybe I could illustrate this with a story as well.
Please.
From clinical practice, which was very enlightening for myself. So I've been working both in a hospice and in a hospital. And after I was already quite experienced in the sense that I had practiced for several years, but I started in a new hospital, and I was very eager to show that palliative care was actually a contribution and should be part of the whole program. So I was really eager to show something is I can contribute. And so this patient comes in, woman about 60-year-old, having cancer, had metastasized cancer also in her brain, and she couldn't move her arm very well. And she sits with me in the outpatient department. So we get to know each other. And she starts crying. And she has all sorts of complaints, not necessary complaints physically, although she was afraid of a high blood pressure, and we measured her blood pressure, but it was fine. But she was always so worried about her cat, and the microwave didn't work, and her neighbors were on holiday, and her daughter was planning to move away from her. So there was all these, and the more she was talking, the more she was emotional, and the more she was crying. And so I thought, what do I do? I want to make a good impression to all my colleagues and the person that is sending her to me to be seen. But she was getting more and more emotional. So I said, Ellie, I see that you're emotional. The best thing I can think of is that I just write down in your charts in the computer a 1, and you mention the first thing that comes to your mind. And so she was high blood pressure. Okay. 2, my cat is sick. 3, the microwave is broken. So we ended up with a list of about 17, 18 items that were crucial for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then time was up. And I hadn't talked about medication. I hadn't talked about pain or any symptoms that medically, quote unquote, would be very important. And then the patient dignity question kicked in. And I said, so how do we go from here? And she said, well, I don't want to come back to the hospital. I want to go home. And you just ring my local general practitioner and I'll sort things out with him. If I need you, I'll call you. Okay. So, and by the time we said goodbye, she was very relaxed and all the emotions were sort of cleared up. So that was my conversation with Ellie. And I tend to write a log for myself of what kind of stories I come across or what observations I had. So I'd written down, this is strange. The only thing I did was practically list her symptoms or the things that she thought were important. And I was practically embarrassed of my own notes because they had nothing to do with medical things.
Right.
So that was that. And then 3 weeks later, she was admitted in the hospice that I also was still working in. And she came, she saw me, and she said, oh, that's incredible that we meet again. We had such a powerful conversation.
Mm.
And I said, yeah, completely agree. I had written that down in my diary as well, that this was an important conversation. So help me understand, why was this an important conversation to you? And she said, well, you did 2 things. You listened to me. There's not a lot of doctors who listen to me. And 2, you wrote down the things that I thought were important in order that other doctors actually saw the things that I thought were important. And so reflecting on this is strange. The conversation and the notes that I wrote, I was practically embarrassed for them, but they were key for the patient. So if we ignore death and what that means for that particular person, we miss out on life. So I would be very important, and she would have to follow my medical story, namely, what are your medications? What kind of symptoms do you have? What do you, blah, 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 blah. And what she needed was a doctor that was actually following her story. So that was a powerful lesson for myself, that I need to have this perspective that I'm following you. You're the topic of conversation. And yes, I have expertise and I have things to contribute to your life if need be. But I can only contribute if I know in what way I can contribute or to what I can contribute. So that changed my complete perspective on basically the way we can provide care. And it was a powerful, we were actually constructing something together. We were making something new. So she was providing me with building stones and I was contributing, I was listening, following her. So it was a very powerful thing to feel connected. It was life affirming. It still baffles me, but it taught me that the patient and the perspective they bring needs to be my perspective as well. And that patient dignity question helps me with the mindset of opening up the conversation. What do you bring? What do we work with? And for me, that connects to improvisation, for example, of working together, building something new, which is very beautiful. Yeah.
That story is really powerful. And there's kind of three things that I'm pulling out of that story that connect very deeply to what it means to embody a communication perspective. And I use that language very intentionally. I think it is a very embodied practice. And it is one, what you just named at the end, that you created something together in your communication, in talking, in listening, and showing up. You constructed something that was very real. And that's so important to understand. Communication creates our realities. And so the quality of our communication creates the quality of our realities. Another thing that you spoke about there that is so important is another question of creation, really, is seeing meaning as socially constructed. And you mentioned, and I know it to be true, other people know it to be true, conversations around death and dying are incredibly challenging. So I think for people who feel more uncomfortable leaning into that conversation than maybe someone like you is, that's a great kind of get your foot in the door question or thing to be thinking about. Is that question that anybody can ask in any situation. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
What does death mean to you? What does dying mean to you? What does X, Y, or Z? What does anything mean to you? Is such a great clarifying question, because a lot of times we take for granted that we are making the same meaning about something. And almost never are we making the same meaning, because we all have different contexts that we're showing up with.
Yeah.
The third thing that I'm hearing in your story is that question of patient dignity. And that's about having choice, about seeing yourself as an active participant in this creation of your social worlds. You have choices in your communication, and that's what you do by, centering the patient and their story.
Yeah, completely agree. And maybe also, so these are, I think, topics or phrases that fit your coordinated management of meaning.
Yes.
Which is as such new to me. So we can discuss the topic, but we'll use different words. For me, thinking in the mindset of improvisation helps a lot. And maybe I should clarify that, because often we think of improvisation as some sort of second best plan. Say, I plan to travel with plane, the flight is canceled, I need something else, I take a bus or I take a train. So it's like this one-time act.
Yeah.
For me, improvisation is much more a process in which improvisation has to do with improvises, that which is unforeseen, but it can also be translated as is not seen. So if I'm curious, I can cultivate this sense of wonder of how do you think, how are you wired, how do things work for you? Then there's so much room to actually, okay, this is how I think. And especially around death, so many different thoughts and things that steer our mind and our behavior. If we can open up that room and space, then there's so much to be gained. That would be one way of seeing the phrase, if we ignore death, we miss out on life. If we ignore that which death sets in motion, then there's no way to connect with each other on the topic. That for me, that process of working together, which you call this creation of realities together and seeing meaning, that in many ways can be so tangible when death is also part of the conversation, which makes it so, you named it a difficult or challenging conversation. Catherine Mannix, a doctor from the UK, uses the word tender, which I completely love.
Yeah, I love the point about improvisation, because I'll go ahead and out myself here as one of the people that, like you framed it a second ago, believe that improvisation is the plan B. I always saw having a plan as the best option, and being unprepared is lazy or undesirable, more undesirable than having a plan. So this is one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout learning about the CMM theory. And it's interesting to say, because if you look at, originally what was written about CMM, you're not going to see that language of improvisation in there. But the people that practice it now, so many people talk about improvisation. So it really resonates to hear what you're saying, because I think we're kidding ourselves. Because like I said, we are active participants and we have choice, but that doesn't mean we control everything. And so understanding your participation as improvisation is so important for opening up possibilities in terms of how we can be together in a new way.
Yeah, and that basically how we can be together in contact with the patient. I'm eager to know what unseen part of you should I take into account. So enlighten me, so I can adjust my care to your needs. And therefore, we need to open up space around death and dying, on how that connects with each other in a very practical way when we think about attachment. Because attachment is really helping the other to feel secure enough to open up with the vulnerability that death logically brings. So we should help each other to shed light on the unseen and walk the path together. That's basically palliative care, if you ask me.
Yeah. Let's get into it now. I'd love to know more about how you're using attachment theory and relating it to palliative care and what I know you call the palliative paradox.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very eager. But maybe before we dive into the palliative paradox, one more thing. And shall we do something that I haven't done before?
Sure.
Some sort of exercise together. One of the things we're saying is life and death are very connected. And sometimes we think that death is somewhere out there away from us. But actually, I don't know, when was the last time you clipped your nails? When you've clipped your nails,
yes,
and you hold your nails in your hand, you're actually holding something of you that's no longer a part of you. So that's a part of our mortality that we actually have in our hands. So death, after taking a shower and you pluck your hairs out of the drain, that's your mortality. So we should let go of the thought that death is only at the end of the life. It's part of us. So that's one. And the little exercise that I would like to do, and let's please envision yourself that you are in a new birthday party and you meet somebody you don't know. Now, how do you introduce yourself to this person you don't know? So you don't have to tell it right now, but take a couple of seconds and think of what will I tell somebody else if I introduce myself. And potential listeners can do the same. Try to make it verbalize it for yourself. What do you tell other people about yourself? You've done the exercise, right?
Yeah, let me share.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions. Have you shared your name?
Yes.
Did you introduce yourself with the name? Okay. Did you mention something that you studied or how you're working?
Yes.
Okay. Did you share something, whether your hobbies or married or relational wise?
Yes.
Now, have you mentioned your weight?
No.
No. Have you mentioned your shoe size?
Nope.
How tall you are?
Nope.
Okay. So that's exactly the point. So if we mention our name, we're actually mentioning something that's relational. My parents gave me my name. I'm called after my grandfathers. So that's a relational, social thing. If I tell you that I'm married or if I have children, as I did in the beginning of the podcast, I'm telling you something relational, social. If I'm telling you this topic is what really excites me and you can wake me up to talk about death and life, then I'm sort of saying something that's existential to me. It's it's something spiritual, not necessarily religious, but it's something that sort of gives me air under my wings and helps me to fly. But I don't mention any physical things. But if I am at the emergency department in a hospital, all the things that the doctors logically and just very justifiable are interested in are my bodily symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, there's an interesting report of the Lancet, which is a big medical journal.
Okay.
And the report is called Bringing Death Back into Life.
Mm.
They challenge us to have another understanding of death and dying. And one of the things it mentioned, and they call this a realistic utopia, so something that's not present, but that could be beneficial for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
is that if we don't see death as a purely physical event, something that happens at once in a time, but if we see dying as a relational and spiritual process. So it's a much longer period of time. So that could really help our understanding of what we're doing. One of the things with dying and death is that dying is basically our awareness that death is at some point present, and how that awareness sort of influences the way we deal relationally. For those who like reading, like me, Alan Kelleher had written a very nice book about this, the social history of dying, and he mentioned this awareness of death influencing our way of living and our relationships. Now, that sort of brings us to attachment. For attachment is a theory about basically relational dynamics, and that brings us to the palliative paradox. And this is some sort of thought that evolved over the years, and it started, I think, basically by reading books from Brene Brown or Multipliers from Liz Wiseman and Breckman Yowen on how we can actually impact each other in life, in attachment. And basically, if I do attachment short by making it so simple, but if we can just picture ourselves with a toddler and we sit as a parent or as a babysitter, and you take a toddler to a playground, the toddler feels safe knowing that the parent is there, and the toddler wanders around and plays with sand or on the swing or whatever, a slide. But there's no very close contact because the child knows mom and dad are sitting and drinking a cup of coffee at the side. And then if all of a sudden this big dog appears, then the toddler is scared and needs security and finds the lap of the person he's with. And the person he's with, like, let's say the toddler comes to me and I'll say, oh yeah, I know there's a big dog and I know you're scared of the big dog, but you're safe. We can do this together. It's not strange to be scared about this big dog, but we're stronger together, right? So that's basically attachment in a very short illustration. It has to do with connection. It has to do with threat and having a secure base while feeling threatened. And Bowlby, the describer of attachment theory, he said that this behavior that we need safety when we're under threat is behavior that works from cradle to grave. So it's throughout life, we have this need for having this security. Mm-hmm. And having thought that through or seeing that, and especially after having read some things about emotionally focused therapy, which is a relational therapy, which is quite unique if you ask me, and how that works. And my wife and I, we did a retreat on emotionally focused therapy, which greatly impacted me in a positive sense. I started seeing this dynamic also around deathbeds, that people logically are afraid of death because death is a threat. Death is the dog, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to provide security. We need to provide that lapse that somebody can come to. That in itself is palliative care. We provide security knowing that death is imminent. And just like we cannot provide safety for the toddler without mentioning the dog, it's practically impossible to provide safety if we don't mention death as a threat to our connection.
Yeah.
And so if the toddler comes to us and we provide safety and we provide connection, that connection does not mean that the dog is away. The dog is gone. The dog can still be there, but we feel that the connection is even more stronger, is more potent than the threat. The same goes for death. So death will eventually separate us, which is tragic. But even in the threat of being separated, connection needs to be cultivated and enlarged. And so by enlarging our capacity to connect with each other, exchanging thoughts on this separation, this threat, can help us build connection, which is basically the best remedy we have while faced with threat. And that would be, for me, the palliative paradox, that at the moment we have to let go, we need to be connected. And if we can enlarge that sense of connection, we can die connected, quote unquote, which doesn't make death light. It doesn't make it necessarily beautiful. There's all the reasons for mourning. There's all the reason for grief. But I have seen that people who are able to attune to each other and the emotions that they experience while faced with death are much more in sync with each other, both the person that is dying and the bereaved or to be bereaved. It helps both. And that for me is the palliative paradox, and that attuning to each other in this very difficult emotional situation is of crucial importance, basically.
This paradox is making me go back to the language of stories and what's the story we have around death and dying. And I think I'm kind of holding two paradoxical stories in my head right now, and I'll be curious to know what you think about this. The first is that we've already spoken about this, but my friend Merritt just recently passed away. She was on the podcast, interviewed me. She's been a part of this podcast from the beginning. The microphone that I used to record, she got it for me at the very beginning. So I'm always holding her with me. And the whole time I knew her, she was dying, essentially. She had cancer that she knew was terminal the entire time I've known her. And she is one of the most intentional, relational people. That same quality that I think you seek to offer people, that being listened to, that being seen, being heard. She certainly offers that, and had, again, the whole time I know her, and I believe before, the time that she was diagnosed. And so that is an example that I hold close to me that makes everything you're talking about, it makes me believe in it. It makes it feel very real because it wasn't something we all acted like we didn't know, that death was close for her. And we still had a lot of connection. On a very different note, are you familiar with Brian Johnson? There's a documentary about him on Netflix that I just watched. It's called Don't Die. He's a billionaire CEO who is obsessed with anti-aging because he wants to live forever, whatever. And I just watched it, and it was, again, there's this relational piece to it where I see I think they did a really great job of kind of like displaying the humanity of it, of the relationships, and why, someone would want to be healthy and stay around for as long as possible. But there's also this really like icky side of it that just made it felt like the antithesis to, you would hate it, essentially. It felt like the antithesis to, if we ignore death, we miss out on life. This man spending, his entire day taking 130 pills and doing extreme crazy treatments that are not safe to try to, quote, live forever or live the longest or whatever. So I just, you got me thinking about all these different stories that we have about death and dying, and how they are all just stories, but which ones do we kind of choose to subscribe to, or what are our experiences?
Yeah. And then, so I haven't seen it. I've just 2 days ago during lunch, some people thought about this documentary or mentioned it and said that they actually had a craving to go to some sort of fast food chain to sort of physically oppose all the things that you were saying. So there are all these stories, and so for me, if we come back to the thing that is actually about a social thing,
Yeah.
that also means that we can provide this cloak, this pallium, together as a society. So yes, we need doctors if there's pain or if there's. I'm not saying I'm against medicine,
Hmm.
but I do think our approach to palliative care is so much unbalanced that we're so much thinking, oh yeah, if you need palliative care, you need to go to a hospital or you need to go to a hospice. But actually, if we're taking this story and letting it speak to us that we're relational people, that it's a process, that we all have something to contribute. So if we want to provide security, yes, you can come to me. So hopefully, as a medical professional, I will provide security. But that doesn't mean that Abbie is not capable of providing security. So
Hmm.
if this whole sense of helping each other as a society, we can all provide security when people are faced with death. A lot of people that I've met said, well, I'm very happy I can talk with you about death, but in my personal social area, it's like death does not exist.
Yeah.
So if death does not exist, we don't have room for opening up and helping each other. We can provide safety with each other. So this is a societal story that we can listen to. And if we don't, so if we ignore death, we miss out on life. We miss out on the opportunity that I can be of help to you.
Hmm.
I can bring you food, or I can just ask you, how are you doing today? And you can tell me, oh, today I feel like whatever, right? It's welcoming the unseen. And we can do that as a society. And I truly think that if we could practice ourselves in this capacity of providing safety for ourselves, maybe to open up to the story of death, we can help others as well. So this is something that is really something that we have a lot to learn, and we can learn together. We can listen to the story of death being part of our lives,
Hmm.
which goes for all of us. So how can we help each other provide that security that is so essential when faced with threat? And the palliative paradox, and I use it, I can also explain it to patients. It helps them to actually attune to each other emotionally.
Hmm.
And for then the person that is left behind, if somebody dies, they have their own thoughts, they have their own doubts, they have their own emotions. Are we able to help each other attune to each other? How can we practice that? Well, that's what I'm where I think society has a lot to gain. So there's a lot of potential within society to provide that palliative care, to provide that pallium, and basically it's even more urgent if you think about it, because we
Yeah.
have this whole dying. We have a baby boom that was after World War II. We're gonna have a
Mhm.
dying boom.
Yeah.
So we need to adjust to each other. And there's a new textbook, Oxford textbook on public health palliative care, which mentions the 95% rule. And the 95% rule tells us that of all the time a person in the last period of life spends, only 5% is spent with healthcare personnel. Okay, so let me so 95% of the time a patient spends in the last phase of life is not with healthcare personnel. So that's with family, alone,
Hmm.
with friends, neighbors, colleagues, you name it. So if we want to unleash potential in society to provide good palliative care, we need to
Hmm.
strengthen the people that actually provide or spend those 95% of the time with this patient.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it gives us a whole different perspective on palliative care. For it's not something that we go to a hospital that provide it. So that sort of we check out your needs. This is how we manage the difficulties. Here's your problem. This is the solution. It's strengthening the way we look at life and the way we look at death, and seeing our own potential to support the other fellow mortal, in a sense, that is in a certain phase of life where we can contribute. Which makes it completely different,
Hmm.
if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your project that you're working on with Munch's
Ah,
artwork.
so we have Munch also. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm working with Munch at the moment. I initiated a program that we called Explore Life and Death with Munch. The interesting thing of Munch, a Norwegian painter, is that he had quite some experience with death and loss itself, both his own physical condition as a child, being bedridden a good part of the time, and his mother and his sister died. So he was very confronted with death. And he decided, or he painted a lot about death, and he was criticized for the fact that he painted so much about death. And Munch's reaction to being criticized was that he actually thought that his work helped people to learn about death and live after it. So use it in their lives. So Munch himself thought that his work could help people in a sort of therapeutic way to basically live a better life. And so we use that in work with medical students where we help them to acknowledge own emotions when confronted with paintings and help them to share with each other about their own emotions and how being confronted through art with death sets something emotions with themselves. So they learn to attune both to their own feelings when looking at the paintings and discussing together how that works. And that is for me at least my own path of discovery to see can we find ways in which we can help each other attune to each other and open up this room for those tender conversations or the tender topics. And there's much more to be said. So I'm not sure how long you want that to last. But that's basically what we're doing in the project with Munch.
No, I appreciate that. And yes, there's so much more to be said. Some of the best language that a previous conversation partner on the podcast has given me is to understand the end of these episodes as a comma, not as a period. There's more to
Oh, yeah.
say. And
So,
so we can reconnect around this. Yeah, and people can engage
yeah.
in their own conversations. But it's a wonderful place to start. As we do wrap up, I want to revisit again just the power of stories. You've shared some really beautiful ones so far. I know in a lot of what you've written, you share stories that make it feel really real for people. And my
Mm-hmm.
understanding of stories is that part of the function of them is that the more different stories we can hear, the more our imagination is expanded in terms of understanding what's possible for us in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you have one more story that you could share with us that is what you want to leave people with as they go away from this conversation.
Yeah. Let me mention one story. That's an experience from us here in Norway. As said, we have 4 children, and our youngest went to kindergarten, wasn't speaking any Norwegian, and every time I picked her up, there was something new that she wanted to tell me that was going on. And the one day she came home and she said to me, "Daddy, I can be part of this. I can be part of this society. I can dance." She obviously didn't say society, but she said, I can be along with this dance. And they have this very beautiful initiative in Norway, which I'm on a good sense, or I envy this initiative, which is called the Bli Med Sang. And the Bli Med Sang means that all the children in Norway in primary schools sing the same dance. Every year there's a new dance and they sing it together. And they sing this song together and they dance it, and it's a big festivity. And she was so excited that she could be along with everybody else. She was equal and she could contribute. It took me a while because when we came here, that was 2022, and my Norwegian was bad at the time, still on the way up. I only later listened to the lyrics of that song that everybody, all the schools, they were singing about society. And the thing they sang about society is that they said that when darkness comes, when the sun goes down, we can be stars for each other in the darkness. So we can light up for each other when death comes, or at least that's my interpretation. So when death comes, we can be stars for each other. And that underscores and underlines for me the relational dynamics that happen when we are confronted with death. And if we lose sense of that possibility to connect with each other, we miss out on life. There's so much potential in our relational dynamics and our social structures. And I would love that we could strengthen that.
Beautiful story. Yeah, Christiaan, I really appreciate you sharing this story, and I'm really appreciating this conversation. And as we wrap up, what I want to do is, I talked about I'm resurrecting this. How are we arriving to begin our episodes? That's something that's very important to me. And I think we just proved the importance in our episode talking about relational context. Maybe I would allow the doctor to provide me security if when they ask about my weight, my height, my whatever, they also ask me how I was arriving, that's maybe a really important question. Another change I'm making as I'm moving into this new season of the podcast, season 4, is that at the end of episodes, I would ask people, and I know I prompted you with this question in our preparation for this conversation, how is your work a part of creating better social worlds? Or at different times I've asked, how do you define a better social world? And I think those are really important questions to be asking. But I want to move away from that a little bit. And instead of us talking about that question, that's what I want to leave people who are listening with. I want to pose that question to them. That's the comma, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. So what I would have other people answer rather than you and I exploring right in this moment is to think for themselves on how this work is a part of creating better social worlds. Again, to me, I have some, I think the answer is kind of obvious, but we're all making different meaning. And so I think that's a really great thing to leave people with, is to see this work as making better social worlds and see it through their own eyes and their own story in that way. So Christiaan, thank you so much for your time and for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it today.
Oh, me too. So thank you very much. Who knows what happens after the comma? So open to all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.